All right, we're ready to look at chapters 35 and 36 in our study of Exodus. This is the outline we are following. We are in this very last section, as we'll wind up here in a couple of weeks as we wind this trimester down. The book outlines itself, or at least as Baxter has outlined it, the Exodus, the Law, and the Tabernacle. We're in the Tabernacle section, and this is where we are in the readiness to complete in the building, and we've got that in our story tonight. So that's what we're going to be focusing upon. Let's review our chapters. Have a few to remember. Chapter 1 begins. Israel is suffering in Egypt. Chapter 2. This leader is born. This Moses, his birth and his early life. Then chapter 3. The call for him to go and deliver the people of God. It's called from the burning bush. Chapter 4, his response was, make excuses. Chapter 5, he goes to, and Pharaoh increases the suffering, makes it worse. Chapter 6, assurance to Moses and to Israel. Then chapter 7 starts the plagues. So we have Aaron's rod and we have the first plague, which that obviously tells us chapter 8 is going to start with the second plague and the third and the fourth. Then we have 5th, 6th, and 7th. Very good. Chapter 10, 8 and 9. And then we have the announcement of the 10th plague. And then in chapter 12, the Passover and the 10th plague. Chapter 13 is where the firstborn are sanctified, and we have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Chapter 14 is one of the more notable because this is the Exodus itself, the crossing of the Red Sea. Because they crossed the sea, chapter 15, Song of Deliverance. Chapter 16, manna from heaven. And closely connected with manna, they need something to drink, water from the rock, chapter 17. Chapter 18, so many problems. Jethro gives some advice. Chapter 19, they finally come to Mount Sinai. Chapter 20 is the notable chapter, 10 Commandments. Chapter 21 starts various laws concerning servants and violence and animals, and we'll put 22 and 23 with that, with property and miscellaneous, Sabbath, justice, annual feast, etc. And then we have the ratification of the covenant. So chapter 25. All right. We're starting into the instructions. Very good. We have the offering, and then there's the ark, and there's the table of showbread and the lampstand. Here are the instructions that we're about to see start being constructed. So chapter 26, we'll flag chapter 26 several times tonight. That is the description or the plan or the pattern for the tabernacle. Then in 27, we have the altar and the court of the tabernacle. Chapter 28 is the garments for the priest. 29, consecration of Aaron and his sons and daily offering. Chapter 30. Altar of incense and the laver. And we have in 31, we'll flag this tonight for obvious reasons. The artisans, the workers on the tabernacle, and the Sabbath law. Both of those are in our study tonight. Chapter 32. All right, that's where they had the problem with the golden calf. And then they're going to leave Sinai. And at first, God's not going to go with them. But before the chapter's through, Moses pleads and God's going with them. They're leaving with God's presence. Chapter 34, last time, we wound up with this. God renews the covenant. All right, go to question number 1, chapter 35. What's it about? All right, Sabbath regulations, and then here's the contribution of materials for the tabernacle and the furnishings. Chapter 36, same question. What's it about? All right, here's materials for and the building of the tabernacle. All right, so here we go, chapter 35. Three things happen in chapter 35. I call it the Sabbath and materials for the tabernacle. It's not built to the next chapter, but we have here the Sabbath law. This is not the first time we've seen this. There's a reason for that. Then we have the offering of the materials for the tabernacle. And then we have the labor for the tabernacle. And notice I've kind of divided that out a little bit, grouping different sections together. And you'll see why we do that here in just a moment. Let me make a comment on chapter 35 to 40 for a moment. It's interesting to me that we have a repeat of the details again, where already we were given details concerning not only the garments but of the tabernacle, and we're told that this layer that went over the tabernacle was to be, or the tabernacle was to be this size, etc. And then this layer goes over, here's the size for it, how it's to be made. Here's the next layer, and here's the size and how it's to be made. Here's the next layer, and the size and how it's to be made. And then the next layer, and you say, okay, we already got it. Then when they get ready to build it, the text goes back through those same details. And so some have raised the question, why all the details? Why didn't it just say they built it according to the pattern? Well, there's a couple of things I think we can learn from that. Number one, whether we ever understand why that's repeated, if God repeats something a second time, he must have thought, I should read that a second time. If he repeats it 10 times, he must have thought, I need to read that 10 times. And so we're going to study that. But here's a point someone made that I think is quite, I started to say quite obvious, maybe it is quite obvious. That this is perhaps stressing how Moses followed the pattern faithfully. To say the least, whether that was the intent of that, we learn from that the value of following exactly what God said. Now, maybe a parallel to that, suppose someone tells you about, I asked a man to build me a garage, and I asked him to build it 25 feet wide and 40 feet long, and to have two doors on it, and to have a 512 pitch. And then the man came out, and you could say he built it just like, but if he emphasizes he built it, the width that I said, he built it the 40 feet long, he put a 512 pitch, he put two doors in, he did just exactly. What's he emphasizing? He did it just like I wanted. He did exactly what I wanted. And I think that's part of the emphasis here. God gave a pattern, and it's not they built something that was kind of like that or close to that, or they did the best they could. The statements are being made, they built it just like the pattern said. There's a lesson in that for us. And so before we get ready to say, well, let's just skip over all of that, I think there's some value in that. And that makes sense to you? All right, let's get underway, verses 1 to 5. This is not, again, the first time we've talked about Sabbath law. There are four things we learn here about the Sabbath law, but let's talk about the purpose and the place of this. If you want to flag and make a marginal note, you might tie chapter 31, beginning at verse 12. This is in that context, there's the artisans for the building of the tabernacle. And this is part of God's final instructions before Moses comes off the mount. And there is some statements about the Sabbath law. That's interesting. All right, let's go to chapter 34 from last time. In chapter 34, God again gives instructions for the Sabbath law and had made the point that even in plowing and harvest time you shall rest. Even when you're real busy with all your crops and all you got to do, you still have the Sabbath to keep. So why is it mentioned here? Seemingly, it's in the context of building the tabernacle, that even with the construction of the tabernacle, that is not justification for neglecting or violation of the Sabbath. Does that make sense? Sometimes we think because this is so important, I can neglect this other important thing. And so I know I'm supposed to be doing this, but I can't do that because this is so important. And we do that sometimes in New Testament times, and yet God thought even though this is important to build the tabernacle, when the Sabbath rolls around, I want you to still keep the Sabbath. And the tabernacle work and your plowing and your sowing is no reason at all to neglect the Sabbath. Does that make sense? All right, 4 things we learned. The first thing here is in verse 2. The Sabbath is a holy day, a day of holiness. It is a day that's set apart. This is a special day. It's a holiday. That's just what a holiday is. It's a special day. It's a day that's set apart for some purpose. And so this is a special day. This is not just another day that rolls around. This is a holy day. The second thing, and this is the first time I remember this being mentioned by the first time, I'm talking about since Genesis up to this point, that this rest is to the Lord. What do you make of that statement? Look at verse 2. This is a Sabbath of rest to the Lord. All right? Now, there's a difference in resting and in resting to the Lord. Do you think there were people that rested on the Sabbath because they were lazy and they rested other days as well? I'm sure they did. There are people that don't go to work on Sunday. That doesn't mean they're worshiping the Lord. They take a day off. But in the Old Testament times, you think people ever rested that didn't observe the Sabbath? I think they likely would. And there was a difference in resting, and the purpose and the motive of the resting is dedication to the Lord. Does that make sense? Third thing mentioned in the context, verse 2c. Those that violated, what happens to them? God quite serious about this matter, isn't he? It's not a matter of, if they violate the Sabbath, kind of get on to them and see if you can't get them to the next Saturday, next Sabbath, rest a little bit. They need to be put to death. And then this is new material for us, verse 3. This has not been mentioned so far. It wasn't mentioned in chapter 31, 34, or chapter 20. All of those mention the Sabbath. We haven't seen this. What is it? Verse 3. No kindling of a fire throughout your habitation of the Sabbath day. No building of a fire. Fields makes this observation in his work on Exodus. He said that's evidence that the Seventh-day Adventist concept that the Sabbath is to be applied continually through all generations in every nation. And that's not so. It was for the Jews. And they were primarily there in Palestine or in the land of Canaan. They were not to kindle a fire. Well, that's kind of difficult if you're observing the Sabbath and you're in a place where you need fire for your... Does that make sense? There's evidence this was not worldwide application. This was for the Jews, as all the Old Testament law was. All right, questions or comments on the Sabbath? All right, let's talk about the offering of the materials. I'm going to divide this up a little bit and group some verses together. Let's focus on their attitude first, and we're going to skip just a little bit. Let's start with verse 5, that Moses gathered the people together. And you might underline, what I'm wanting to focus on is the attitude with which they gave. Look at verse 5. Whoever is of a willing heart. What does that mean? All right, yeah, they desire to do that. They're willing to do that. They're glad to do that. It's like going to services today, or you're giving on the first day of the week. Do you give willingly, or is it like I feel like I'm being forced to do that? I'm doing it only because I have to. So they have a willing heart. That's what I'm focused on. Look at verse 21. Let's drop down, see more of their attitude. Everyone who came, whose heart was stirred. I get the idea that tells me they are excited about this, and there is zeal they have. So not only are they willing to give, they are excited to give. Now think about your giving on Sunday. Do you willingly give, or is it like I just have to? And in addition to I'm willing to give it, are you excited and zealous about that? They came with excitement. Well, let's go again. The spirit was willing, verse 21. Verse 22, they have a willing heart. Drop down to verse 26. Their heart was stirred. There's the zeal and the excitement. Verse 29, there are two statements. There is a free will offering, In other words, there is no coercion. There is no forcing. You have to give this. And their hearts, again, were willing to bring the materials. I see quite a contrast now between what I'm seeing in the people here and their attitude of rejecting God in chapter 32. Does that make sense? I see a change of heart. They are to be commended here, and they are commended here in this context. Now let's talk about what they were to bring. So let's back up to verse 5, and this we can deal with quickly because it's a list of basic materials. So what do we see in 5 to 9? We don't have to mention everything, but just the kinds of things. They're going to bring gold and silver, acacia wood, various stones that are important. Various threads and yarn and goat's hair and ram skin and badger skin, perhaps dolphin or porpoise skins, as your footnote in some translations would say. They're going to bring oil and spices. So all of those things we know, having studied from chapter 26 on, where they fit, what was to be made of acacia wood, what was to be overlaid with gold, what was to be made of silver, like the sockets for the boards of the tabernacle would be of silver, and overlaid with silver, etc. Now we know much about that. We'll come back to that in a moment. So let's drop down to verse 20. Now what we're skipping, we'll get to in a moment. Start at verse 20. And I want you to look at the not only the attitude that we've already seen, but I want you to notice at verse 20. This is an interesting, I hadn't caught this before, the immediate change. First of all, when Moses, I'll come back to the immediate change in a minute, but when Moses instructs the people to give, notice that there is not a word about anyone objecting. That's interesting. There's not a thing about someone complaining that, do we have to give, will you have enough without mine? None of that. They willingly give, as we've already indicated. But notice at verse 20, notice the immediacy of this. That all the congregation of the children of Israel departed from the presence of Moses. Now that's after he's already told them, here's what I need you to bring. Gold and silver and acacia wood and yarn and skin and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. We need all that. So y'all go get it. And the text says, they departed from the presence of the Lord. The very next statement says, then everyone came. Notice the immediacy. Here's what we need to build the tabernacle. I need all these materials. They left. Next thing, they came back, bringing it all. Now, this is quite interesting, too. I want you to notice. They brought things that were dear to them, like in verse 22, earrings and nose rings and rings and necklaces and gold jewelry, etc. They brought all that. There are two times this statement is made. In verse 23 and verse 24, and every man, here's the phrase, with whom was found the blue and purple, etc. Let's get it again in verse 24. And everyone with whom was found acacia wood. What do you make of that phrase? Everyone with whom was found. All right. In other words, it's not like, well, we need acacia wood. Well, I've got some, but I had some plans for that. Dickie's got some. Let's see if we're going to have enough with him. No, that's not the way it happened. Dickie's got acacia wood, he takes it. I've got acacia wood, I take it. Larry's got acacia wood, he's going to take it. Does that make sense? Anyone with whom it was found. So what if we, and this is just an illustration, so don't get excited. We said, anyone who's got a $20 bill, please give it. We need it for something. And if a $20 bill is found with you, if you follow this principle, you're going to bring it. Does that make sense? They gave willingly and sacrificially. That's what I'm after. I found that phrase interesting. Again, what is it? With whom was found. That's, notice it in verse 25. That all the women who were gifted artisans, they spun yarn. So I want you to get the picture. It's not like there's just extra wood over here. I've got a lot of wood built over here, and I'm not going to use it, so I'll bring that. But if he had acacia wood, he brought it. If they had gold, they brought it. Things they didn't have, they made. We need, for example, verse 25, yarn made from various things. We need some fine linen. So women started making yarn. They start taking goat's hair and making thread. Does that make sense? We need it, so people started making it. Like at verse 26, they spun yarn of goat's hair. You think if we were going to build a life-size model of the tabernacle and ask everybody, y'all bring what you can, but we don't have anything made of goat's hair. So somebody needs to go get some goat's hair and start making the thread so we can sew that together, weave it together, and so we can make some cloth. We need a big cloth made out of goat's hair. Who wants to do that? You see the sacrificial thing I'm driving at?
Very similar to Acts 4.
Say again?
Very similar to Acts 4.
Absolutely. Very similar to Acts 4 if you didn't catch your comment. All right. Now we're going to get the section we just skipped, but we're just seeing what they gave and the attitude with which they gave that. All right, let's talk about the labor for that, and this will finish this chapter. Let's go back to 10 to 19. There were skilled laborers to make all of these items. And we've already talked about these skilled laborers, and we'll flag some other passages on that here in a minute. We'll go back to verse 10. That all who are skillful, might underline that word skillful, among you shall come. Now we're going to get the rest of what 10 to 19 says, but what do you learn from that? That there was a call for those who were skillful workers to come. And we're going to see some details of skillful workers here in 30 to 35. Let's pause and just make something practical out of that. What do you make of that?
Seems like they were gifted artisans already, and God gave them additional skill.
I think so.
Something in that
I think
for us as well.
I think that's true. I think the text is indicating, particularly in 30 to 35, we'll get to in a second, that not only was there some natural skill, but God had instilled skill in certain ones. So there's a practical thing that God blesses us sometimes with ability that God expects us to use. What else do we learn? Yes. Yeah, using that skill is not the same as pride. Good point. And offering that. If we needed somebody that had skill to cut some acacia wood, anybody skilled at cutting wood, okay, well then to say I can do that is not arrogance at all. George?
Also, God wanted the best too. Therefore, people were more important than you what they were doing. Just anybody doing.
Yeah, that's what I was fishing for there. All these are good points. That the work of the Lord deserves doing the best. We want skilled workers. Could you see this happening perhaps in some settings? We need to build a tabernacle. Okay, let's just build it. Do you know anything about wood? No, I don't know anything about cutting wood, but it don't matter. All God cares about is your attitude. You know anything about putting weaving? No, but let's try. How hard can it be? And can you imagine the mess it would look like? God wanted skilled workers because God's work deserves the best. I think there's something about an attitude there. So let's start at verse 10. We'll quickly go 10 to 19 because basically there were skilled workers who needed to come to make the tabernacle and the tent and the clasp and the boards and the sockets, and I won't read every word of that, and the table and the poles and all the things that have already been mentioned, the incense altar and the poles, etc., and the bronze altar and its poles, etc., and even making the garments, verse 19, and the hanging of the court pillars, etc. So there were skilled workers needed for every one of these items, from the garments to setting the stones to making the material to sewing it together to overlaying the acacia wood with gold to make the poles and the rings. Skilled workers, how many there were, we are not told. Let's go to verse 35. There are two workers that are identified here that we've already seen. If you want to flag and tie verses together, I like doing that in my text. While I can remember that now, 3 years from now, I may not remember that 35 and 31 tie together. So that's why I like to make marginal notes. But anyway, you might make a marginal note, chapter 31, starting with verse 1 through verse 12, talks about these same two workers. So let's see what we learn here. Bezalel who was the grandson of Hur. Who was Hur? We talked about him back in chapter 31. He held up the hand, very good, the hand of Moses with the war with the Amalekites. Remember that? So he, as Rufus Clifford used to say, he come from good stock, I think. Verse 31, he was filled, and this is the thing JP was talking about, filled with the Spirit of God in wisdom and understanding and in knowledge and all manner of workmanship. I think from chapter 31 in here too that Bezalel was kind of the chief artisan or worker, and that Aholiab works under him and also had different skills, and then they taught others. And we'll get to the teaching others here in just a second. And I'll give you evidence of that if you don't remember. But anyway, I want to go back to verse 31. He's filled with wisdom and understanding that God gave him. And his artistic work involved things of gold and silver and cutting of jewels and carving wood and all manner of artistic workmanship. And God gave him, this is only mentioned here. It's not mentioned in chapter 31. He had the ability to do what? Verse 34. Say again. Absolutely. He to put it in his heart, the ability to teach. Now let's go back to 31 and in verse 6. God said, I've put wisdom in the hearts of all who are gifted artisans. So not only were there these two, there was a whole passel of workers. How many we're not told. I don't remember. There may be a reference somewhere, but I don't remember it if there is. How many there are. And so there was a whole bunch of them, and he had the ability to teach. Now, Aholiab said, what does the text say about him? Verse 35, and then we'll finish this chapter. He had a different set of skills. His was more in, he was an engraver and a designer in tapestry and weaving, etc. And so basically he led in that. Doesn't mean he did it all, he led in that. And so you have these two leaders, and then you have many workers, and so there's work to be done, and all were skilled. Make sense? This is a big task to undertake. And so we have workers on the scene to get the job done. All right. Now, let's go to chapter 36. Let's get a couple of questions, and then we'll go to 36. Let's go to question number 7. What did Moses do about the amount of offering the people had brought? Yeah, I told him it's time to stop it because we not only have enough, have more than enough. Question number 8. Find a New Testament passage that tells us to give freely and willingly. All right, 2 Corinthians 9 verses 6 and 7 would do the job. All right, let's work through this section here in verses 1 to 7. The people gave more than was needed. This is not a surprise for that time, nor is it a surprise in our own day and time. There have been more than one occasion where I have known of putting some money together from brethren that wasn't through the treasury, but I've known of some cases where they were putting into the treasury of churches. I know of some churches where they didn't have money, and they told the brethren, we're not going to be able to have a gospel meeting unless there's money there. And not only did they have enough, but they had more than enough to have a meeting when brethren found out. I have been a part of collecting some money when somebody was in need, and we have far more come in than was needed. I'm convinced that if we announce tonight, so-and-so needs $20,000 tomorrow to have surgery, we would have $30,000 before we left the building tonight. I'm convinced. That's the way people give. God's people do that. And we see that here. So notice at verse 3, let's jump down, let's get verse 2, that everyone whose heart was stirred, there's that excitement. They're excited to give. And notice verse 3 says it was a free will offering. They brought to the point that the craftsmen began, what did they say? Yeah, we got more than we need. If you've ever worked on something, maybe it's working in the kitchen and you need some eggs and you need some flour, etc., and people start bringing you your kitchen's full. You don't need that much. In building, you only need so much materials. You don't need the whole world. And so now they've got more than they can handle. And so Moses commanded them. Notice the people bring much more than enough, verse 5. And verse 7 said that verse 6, he restrained them from bringing because they brought indeed too much, more than was needed. What do you learn from that before we move on?
God tells you to do a job and the ability there to complete the task.
Good point, yes. If God gives you a task, you have the ability to complete the task. And that was true then, and it's true now. All right, let's talk about building the tabernacle. Now, we can run quickly through this for two reasons. One is we're just have a little time. And the second reason is we are familiar with this material. And notice what I've done in my outline here is flag the parallel verses where that was described. And in some cases, there's a little more information given in one place than in another. But let's see if we can make some sense of this, and I think we can. Let's start with verses 8 through 13, what's called the inner cloth. And if you care to turn over to chapter 26, and you may want to turn over there and flag that or make some parallels. But chapter 26, verses 1 through 6 is where you find the instruction, and this is the fulfillment of that. So this inner cloth, according to verse 8, is made of fine linen and has the artistic design of cherubim on them. And the size of it, verse 9, was 28 cubits by 4. You might make a marginal note if your Bible doesn't already do this for you. 42 feet in length, 6 foot wide. And he makes how many panels? How many of those? He makes 10. He takes 5 and puts them together, and 5 and puts them together, and then ties them all together so that at verse 13, it might be one tabernacle. So let's see what we're talking about in case we've forgotten. I don't know if you can tell in this. I'm going to show you several pictures here. There are actually 4 layers. If you can follow my little dot right here, there's 4 layers right in here. And it's that first layer that has a colorful look to it. It's this layer right here. This got the artisan design on it. And that's what we're talking about, this layer right here in another picture. This first layer. It's put down first, and it has 5 panels. All right, 5 and then 5 making 10. Let's start at verse 14 now. We back up and go to verse 14 through verse 18. There is an outer cloth, and what's it made of? Verse 14. Goat's hair. Now the parallel account's going to be found where the instructions were given in 26, 7 to 13, if you want to turn back there and flag that, or flag that in the margin of your text. Now that's the next layer, which is right above that, as you see here, perhaps better seen right here. That's this one of goat's hair. And what's the size of it in feet? It's a little bigger in length, same width. 45 feet by 6. All right. And how many of those panels did he make? You would assume, if you didn't see, that there would be, since there was 10 before, there are also, but are there 10? There are 11. 11 of those. So it becomes a little longer. Does that make sense? All right. Now let's back up and go back to our text again. The next layer, beginning, in fact, I say beginning, it's only one verse, verse 19. And there's only one verse found over in chapter 26. And that's the ones made of ram skin and badger skins. All right? So let's talk about them. That's this one right here, not the very top one, but the next to the top. And it was to be dyed red, and that's the ram skin, as you see here. And The badger skin, there's some question. Your footnote will say dolphin skin. Some translations use the word porpoise. Is it the Revised Standard? One of them, I forget which one uses that. Some question as to what that is. Some think it's actually a goat skin. I'll go with dolphins, and that seems to be the more popular concept. What were the sizes of those coverings? We are not told. They covered, so I have a general idea of the covering size. They're bigger than the other cloths so that they cover those. But what are their exact dimensions? We are not told. One verse is given over in the instructions. One verse is given in the building thereof, that he made a covering of ram skin dyed red and a covering of badger skin above that. And so we have these 4 layers on the top of the tabernacle. Making sense? All right, now we're ready for the boards. Let me get on over here closer so we can take a look at the boards. Verses 20 to 30 deal with the boards, and the parallel to that, or where the instructions are, is in 26:15 to 25. All right, now the boards are these boards that the tabernacle itself, they are around 3 sides. This is the north side. This over here is the south side, and this is the west side or the end. So those boards that we're talking about, how long and how wide were they? How tall were they? They were to stand vertical, upright, verse 20. In height, they are 15 feet, and how wide are they? 27 inches. All right. So how many boards are on the north side or south side, verse 23? There's 20 boards, which means the same thing is on the north side, which is 20 boards. And then verse 27 says on the west side, which would be what we think of as the back, there are 6 boards. Why does then verse 30 mention 8 boards? 2 for the corners. Exactly what that looked like, we don't know. I kind of like this picture here, which shows you'd have your 6 boards across and then 1 on each corner, and that makes the 8 boards. Notice that there is mentioned about the tenons. We talked about the tenons by which they're put together. It seems to me, and this is the 2 tenons of verse 24, perhaps like these tenons here, but there also seems to be something at the bottom to join it to the socket that's mentioned at verse 26. Now, what kind of wood are these made of? Of acacia wood. Let's drop down now to verse 26. Now what's being made? All right, there's the sockets, the silver sockets at verse 30. Let's see. At verse 26, I'm sorry. And then it also mentioned at verse 30. That's at the base of these sockets right down here at the base. I don't have a good picture of that, but something similar to this right here where they set in these silver sockets to stand vertical. Now the bars mentioned here, how many bars are there? And verses 26 to about verse 34. 31 to verse 34, I'm sorry. There are 5 bars on each side and 5 in the west side. Does that make sense? And there's 1 in the middle that goes all the way through. So the exact location of those, some draw a broken, like these 2 are broken here. That is, there's 2, and there's 2, and then there's 1 that's solid right there in the middle, if I can get my light to cooperate. But that the same thing could be over here, or they have kind of staggered those. But anyway, there were two that were independent, and then there's one across, and then two independent at the bottom. Make sense? And those hold the thing together. Let's drop down to verse 35. What else are we seeing at verse 35? There's the veil. Now, what's the significance of this veil? By the way, the parallel is 26, 31 to 37, and we learn more there than we learn in this text about the veil. Exactly. That's not mentioned here, but that's mentioned in chapter 26. It was to separate the holy place from the most holy place. That was the significance thereof. Now, what else do we learn here about this veil? It was to be made of woven of blue and of purple and scarlet yarn, fine linen. Does it have any design to it? Cherubim. What's it to hang on? That's this veil right here. On 4 pillars. Notice these cut off pillars right here. That's cut off for us to see inside. But you see right there, there's 2. And then there's 2 hidden behind the curtain right there. You see the same thing there. That's where the veil was, and it hung on those 4 pillars. And they are to be overlaid with gold. Now finally, let's get verse 37 and 30, verses 37 and 38. What's this section about? Making of the, what's the screen? Found in 26 and 36 is a parallel where the instructions were. Yeah, it's basically the for lack of a better term, this front door, the front panel. That's this right here. That's the screen. And it was to hang on how many pillars? 5. 5 pillars. And that's where, I thought I had one more picture. Maybe I don't. But anyway, that's it in the front. And it is, what's it made of? Purple and scarlet yarn and fine linen thread made by a weaver. And it would set on the pillars with 5 sockets of bronze. So quite an elaborate building. Let's go to question number 10. We've got about a minute to go. Let's get 1 or 2 of these practical things here. What do you learn from this story? So, well, this is old hat. We've already been through the instructions, and they just did what he was told, and so surely there's something we learn.
God doesn't expect will worship. What our will is, but He expects His will to be.
All right, good point. God doesn't expect will worship. That is what we will, but what He wants. Good point. What else?
God demands order. God demands order. He wants it a specific way. And one to come after the next one. He wants man to follow the instructions to the letter.
Yeah, and notice that's a good point. The detail that we just talked about a minute ago, that there was a class that put, if I can find my circle right there, that put that corner together on the back corner that's mentioned in both 26 and in 36. God gave great details. It's to be put together with 2 tenons, not 4, not 1, 2 tenons. God gave great details. Follow like I'm telling you to do it. Here's what it's to be made of. All right, what else? Practical.
God's people is not just one particular group. God's people is made up of lots of different people.
Good point. There were skilled artisans in this, skilled in that. And did you notice this? In the gathering, the men and women were involved in gathering their materials and bringing it. And so God's people encompassed all of those. We better stop on that point right there.